Hi, I'm David Hamburger, and in this lesson we're going to look at how to add motion and color to your blues using Freddie Green chord voicings. So Freddie Green was the rhythm guitar player in the Count Basie band for over 50 years, and he used these 3-note chord voicings that he would strum in a style called 4 to the bar. And we're not going to strum them, and we're not playing an ensemble kind of music, but we can take these chord voicings and we can adapt them to playing fingerstyle blues with some really great results. So we're going to just learn a handful of chord shapes, and then we're going to use them in a call and response kind of way along with some single note licks. So let's start with this open position E chord, and we're going to use the thumb for the 6th string, the index finger for the 4th string, and the middle finger for the 3rd string. And we've got this E7 with the root and the flat 7 and the 3rd. And then if we want to start to move up the neck, we can also play E like this, still on the 6th, 4th, and 3rd strings. We've got the 3rd in the bass, and then the root, and then the 5th. So this is an E with a G sharp in the bass, so it's called E over G. And then we can go up further and get an E7 with a B in the bass. So here's the 5th of the chord, the B, and then here's the 3rd and the flat 7. So it's called E7 over B. It's written with that little slash in the middle, E7 slash B. And it just means E7 with a B in the bass. So here we've got 3 chords that all mean E or E7. And so that's how we can start to move around. And then if we take this E7 chord and move it up, we can also use that same shape to play A7. So here's the root and the flat 7 and the 3rd of A. And because we're playing fingerstyle guitar and we want to use open strings when we can play the bass on the 5th string. So now we're not using 6th, 4th, and 3rd string for this one chord voicing, but it makes sense to do it this way with the 5th, 4th, and 3rd string so we can get an open string. So we can also take this E7 shape with the 5th in the bass, and we can move it down and we can use it to play a B7 chord. So here's B7 with F sharp in the bass. So here's the 5th and the 3rd and the flat 7 of B7. And you can see that it looks a lot like this familiar open B7 chord, right? But we're only using 3 strings and we've got the 5th in the bass. And so that's kind of it. Right, so here's the 1 chord, 3 different ways to play the 1 chord, E. Here's a way to play the 4 chord, A7, and here's a way to play the 5 chord, B7. Now this shape right here, which we're also using up here, can also work as a diminished chord shape. And so if we move it up 1 fret, we get G diminished. Now you might recognize this chord shape. If you make a little bar here, you can also get another note for the chord over here at the 2nd fret of the 2nd string. We're not going to do that. We're just going to stick to the 6th string, the 4th string, and the 3rd string. Now we want this chord to take us to the 5 chord. And I'll explain why in just a second. Because the whole idea with these chords is that by using different combinations of them, you can create this smooth kind of motion that sounds almost like a harmonized bass line. So for instance, if we're going to go from E7 to E over G sharp, we can connect it up by using this B7 chord to get there. And the reason it works is because we're just adding in a passing chord or a substitute chord. We're on E, and then we're going to play the 5 chord of E, and then we're going to go back to the 1. So we're playing 1, 5, 1, which is a totally workable and acceptable way to add an extra chord in. Because you're on 1, you go to the 5, and then the 5 resolves or takes you back to the 1 chord. And along the way, it helps you play this kind of bass line, right? Because you can look at the bass notes and they're climbing up. Now, by the same logic, you could also go connect E over G sharp to E7 over B by playing an A7 chord in between. And if you play all the bass notes on the same string, you can see the same kind of walking bass line effect. But of course, we're using the open A string. You can still hear it. And it's the same idea. It's like we're on 1, and we're going to play 4 just for a moment because it's in the same key, and then we're going to go back to 1. So now we have this way to climb up or climb back down. And by the same logic, if we're on the 4 chord, we could go from the 4 chord temporarily to E7 and back, because if you imagine, well, what if I was in the key of A? If I was on an A chord, I could go to A's 5 chord, which is E. E is the 5 chord in the key of A, and then come back to A. So that's another kind of motion you could have. You could even keep going, go A, E7 over B, and then A over C sharp, which is like taking this E over G sharp chord and moving it up. We're not going to really use that in this particular example that we're getting to, but you can just know that that exists. And finally, back to this G diminished. Sometimes you want to get from 1 to 5. And if we go like this, right, that takes us from 1, E over G sharp, down to 5 with the B over F sharp. And we could pass through this G diminished chord to get there. And why diminished chords work is always a little tricky to explain. But the simplest way to think about this is that, you know, if you're on the 5 chord, you know that it sounds good to go up by a half step and back. And so you can think of this G diminished as just being, well, it looks kind of like a C7 chord with the 5th in the bass. So maybe we're just doing that. We're just half stepping onto the B7. And that's a good way to think about it. The most official way to think about it is that this chord shape is actually an F sharp 7 chord with a flat 9 in the bass. And so F sharp is the 5 chord of B7. Meaning, if you were in the key of B, what would the 5 chord be? Well, it would be F sharp. So here we've got F sharp, which takes you to B7. Only we've taken the 9th and flatted it and put it in the bass. If that doesn't mean anything to you or make any sense, don't worry about it. You can still just think of this as like a cool half-step move to get you where you're going. And so from E to this diminished sound to B7, that's how we can resolve and make a smooth transition from 1 to 5. So using all of those, we can just start to use those as answers to single note licks when we're playing blues. We start off with a blues lick, and we're playing the steady bass style, so 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. And then to get to the 4 chord in bar 2, we can pass through this E over G sharp and land on A with the bass on the 5th string and the rest of the chord here. And then a blues lick on A that's heading back to E. And then we can walk up for the next couple of bars. So we get this little call and response. A short lick with a short chord hit, and then a longer lick with a longer chord answer. trying to keep the bass steady. And then the chords on top with the index and middle, the rest of the voicing are kind of syncopated, meaning they don't always fall right on the beat. Here they do, right? It's a bunch of pinches, but here, right, you're pinching and then grabbing the bass. And so here we're also having this diminished chord is going in the other direction, right? We're going from 1 to 5, and then this G diminished is actually taking us up to E over G sharp. So it can go in that direction as well. And in this case, it really is functioning as a diminished chord. It's called the common tone diminished, and it means that this E note is in common between the G diminished and the E that we're landing on. So just in that first 4 bars of the blues, we can answer and then answer this way. I guess you could do it either with that diminished, or you could just jump right over. And then when you're on the 4 chord, you could do that thing of going to the E and then back to the A, and then you could jump up to the 4 chord and then back to the 1, and then here's that G diminished again. It's going to take us to the 5 chord, except when you're playing more jazz and swing influenced blues, instead of going right to the 5 chord, you can add one more chord into the mix. Now this is an F sharp minor 7 chord, again just grabbing the 6th string, 4th string, and 3rd string, and getting a little bit of a melody on top. And then in this case we'll actually go to the B root here, and then we'll go to an F sharp 7. So it's kind of fooling around with all the different things you can do when you get to the turnaround. You can take this B chord and you can precede it with F sharp minor. You can also use F sharp 7 as the 5 of B7 to take you there. The F sharp minor 7 works because in the key of E, the 2 chord is F sharp minor, and so you're basically taking the 5 chord B7 and going, well, let's go 2 to 5 to 1. And the F sharp 7, not minor 7, works because you're borrowing that chord and saying, well, it's the 5 chord of B7, and so we can do 5 to 5 to 1 from 5. From this 5 chord, the 5 of B7 to the B7, which is in turn the 5 of E. So it's a lot of different things to think about, but if you just sort of play them as sounds and get used to what they sound like, it can start to make more sense and kind of get into your ear. And then we can do this kind of turnaround, which is another sort of jazz-inspired blues sound. And the idea is, again, using that idea of the 5 of the 5, you can take that one step further. Like we're saying, okay, we're in the key of E, B7 is the 5 of E, F sharp is the 5 of B7. Well, what's the 5 of F sharp? Ooh, it's C sharp. So that's why you hear this kind of thing. Right? Here's the E chord, here's the 5 of F sharp, which is the 5 of B7, which is the 5 of E. But what we can do is this thing called a tritone substitution, where we're taking this chord and we're going, well, what's the chord a tritone away? Meaning, what's the chord an interval of a tritone away? A tritone is a distance of 3 whole steps. So we can go down 3 whole steps and get to G, keep the rest of the chord the same. And so this G7 is being swapped in for C sharp, and because it's being swapped in, because it has a root a tritone away, but keeps these 2 notes the same, it's called a tritone substitution. And so when we go like this, we're swapping in G7 for C sharp 7. Then we're going to the F sharp that we had originally, right? So from here to G7 to F sharp. And then we'll do the same thing. Instead of going to B7, we'll say, well, what's a tritone away from B7? It's this one right here, F sharp, F7. So now we have this chain of chords that makes the turnaround. It's a lot of different things to put together, but the main thing is just to think about these chord voicings and then how you can string them together using combinations of 1 and 4 and 1 or 1 and 5 and 1. How to use this chord as a half step onto the B7 and then putting the whole thing together as using those chords as answers to your single note lick. So you're not just playing bass and single notes, but having some chord responses as well. So let me play that opening example again slowly, and you can see how these pieces all get put together. So that's how to use Freddie Green chords, Freddie Green chord voicings to add motion and color to your fingerstyle blues. If you'd like to learn more about chord voicings, improvisation, arranging fingerstyle tunes, you can go to my website, fretboardconfidential.com, and I'll see you next time.